Congrats on the epic faceplant you just took off your skateboard. Okay, so you slid 30 feet along the road, but hey, at least everything's still attached. It's starting to feel like your entire body is on fire. Why is this injury so painful? And what are some of the ones that are even worse? Stay tuned to find out on this episode of the Infographic Show. The injuries that will make you cry like a baby. Number 10, road rash. Imagine falling off a bike or a motorcycle at high speed. Your skin slides one way, and the road says nope. Skaters and runners aren't off the hook either. The faster you go, the more skin you donate to the pavement. Ouch! And it actually has roots in a much more minor and earlier injury. Remember falling on the playground and skinning your knees? Ouch! Now imagine that, but full body. Road rash is basically a skinned knee on steroids. Usually only the top layer of skin is taken off, but that's enough to cause agonizing pain that will only get worse as it tries to heal and scabs over, because every time you move, you'll be disturbing the injury. To make matters worse, this injury's got a VIP pass for infections, thanks to all the dirt and debris that can enter straight under the skin. Sure, it'll heal if you clean it up and bandage it, but you're probably getting a nice scar as a souvenir. Almost makes you want to pick up a calmer hobby. Nah, who are we kidding? This next injury is all too common, but that doesn't make it hurt even a little less. Number 9, fractured tailbone. Is there anything more embarrassing than having to walk into a doctor's office and say, "Doc, I broke my butt"? But that's reality for everyone who suffers a tailbone fracture, also known as the coccyx. This is actually the very last section of the spinal column, and it is the last remnant of the tails we used to have as primates. This bone, a fusion of 3 to 5 tiny vertebrae, is most commonly busted in a fall where you land on your butt. But childbirth can crack it too. The result? Agonizing pain that makes you feel like you're sitting in a medieval torture device. So what's to be done about a butt fracture? Well, contrary to that one episode of The Simpsons, there is no such thing as a fanny cast. That's both good news and bad news, as the biggest problem is that every time you sit down, it's likely to be a whole world of pain. The coccyx usually heals on its own, with doctors giving you a donut-shaped cushion to keep the pain off your backside. Surgery can be used to repair the injury if it doesn't heal on its own, but in most cases, it's just going to be several uncomfortable weeks or months, especially if you have a desk job. And it's not the only hidden fracture that can cause some agonizing pain. Number 8, broken collarbone. It's the fourth quarter, you're driving for that goal line, and then the other team's linebacker plows into you like a Mack truck, hitting you directly in the shoulder. No big deal, it's just football. He offers you a hand, but as soon as you reach for it, you pass out from the pain. Lights out. Congrats, you have broken a collarbone, also known as a clavicle fracture. This is one of the bones that affects the movement of the arm, and it's actually one of the more dangerous fractures because if the bone is displaced enough in severe cases, it can affect the nerves or blood vessels in the chest area. And it's surprisingly common, and you don't even have to be an athlete. This is a fracture that can happen whenever there's sufficient impact to the shoulder, and any attempt to move the arm is likely to cause agonizing pain. For treatment, the arm is usually immobilized in a sling for several weeks, but surgical repair can be necessary if the bones were displaced badly. However, maybe the most surprising thing about this injury is that some of the victims can be just out of the womb. This injury can happen to babies when they're born, as the vaginal birth process can push their soft, tiny arms. Minutes old and already filing an injury report. Welcome to the world, kiddo. This next injury is what happens when the punched punch back. Number 7, boxer's fracture. If you punch for a living, your hands take a beating, literally. Even with gloves, pounding a heavy bag or someone's face leaves its mark. It's important to punch straight though because those hands are your money makers, and one wrong hit could turn you into a spectator. This is called a boxer's fracture, which is a fracture in the neck of the 5th metacarpal bone of the hand. Moving the hand becomes extremely painful, and the affected knuckle is pushed back into the hand. And suddenly, it becomes difficult to even close the hand, let alone punch with it. Why is this fracture so painful? Well, think about how many times you use your hand each day. Imagine every single movement is now accompanied by a sharp pain. More importantly, a boxer's fracture that's untreated can impact the ability to form a fist. And that's why doctors usually treat them aggressively with splinting or taping. Even though it's called a boxer's fracture, most of the cases happen outside of the ring. It's far more likely to happen to someone who punches without gloves, which means the most common cause of these might be bar fights. And there's one fracture that might be the most painful of all. Number 6, sprained ankle. This one is easy to get. You're playing sports, running, or just existing, and then the ground goes one way and your ankle goes the other, and you're rolling around in agony, cursing life itself. The sprain happens when one or more of the ligaments of the ankle gets bruised, stretched, or torn, causing intense pain, and walking is just a fond memory. As blood flow increases to the area of the injury, it swells up and the pain increases, making it difficult for someone who sprained their ankle to get help if they're alone. But hey, at least it's not broken, right? Well, yes and no. It depends on the severity of the sprain. A bad one can be more immediately painful than a fracture. A torn ligament may require surgery, and it's likely that someone with a bad ankle sprain will be on crutches for several weeks. The pain can be intense at first, but it'll likely lessen as the days go on. The real problem is once you've sprained that ankle, it's like you signed up for a frequent flyer program for injuries. Studies show it's more likely to betray you again, leaving you in a never-ending loop of pain and doctor visits. Fun times, right? Number 5. Rib fracture. They're bones that don't seem to do much, but they're actually pretty essential. Our rib cage is basically the bodyguard of our critical organs, the heart and lungs. Those 24 bones are thin, but sturdy. But when hit with the right force, they can crack or even shatter. And that will open the victim up to a whole new world of pain. Broken bones hurt the most when they're moved, and while the ribs don't usually move, they are constantly being affected by our everyday breathing. And that means that unlike other broken bones, there is no real way to stop the pain. We all know breathing is pretty important, so when a rib is broken, pain control is the most critical thing to keep the person functioning. Besides that, the chest is often taped to keep the ribs from moving too much. The good news is, in cases of most fractures, ribs will heal on their own. Surgery is only essential if a rib is completely broken or displaced, at which point this can be an emergency because the splintered bone might float out of place and puncture a critical organ, making this one of the rare fractures that can be fatal quickly. But one tendon might just put all the pain of broken bones to shame. Number 4. Achilles tendon rupture. The Achilles tendon is the load-bearing tendon of the body, found at the back of the foot and stretching up the ankle. It is the MVP of walking and has a ton of tension in it, and that means that when it snaps, it's bad. The force of an Achilles tendon rupture is so intense that people say they hear a loud pop when it happens, accompanied by searing pain. Similar to a sprained ankle, this happens when the foot is suddenly bent the wrong way, in this case directly up while the calf muscle is engaged. And repairing this can be much more complicated. Because of the tension packed into the Achilles tendon, surgical repair is almost always required after an Achilles injury. This is usually followed by an extended immobilization while it heals, followed by physical therapy to stretch out the repaired tendon so it can perform the same range of motion. This is one of those injuries that is an athlete's worst fear because it's hard to get back to that same level of natural strength after an injury, and the best way to prevent it is by stretching regularly before exercise. This next one is mostly for the guys. Number 3. Testicular torsion. There are few pains more feared than a nut shot. At least we thought so. Imagine there was a pain like that, but it didn't end. Testicular torsion is when the spermatic cord attached to one of the testicles is twisted, cutting off blood flow to one of the family jewels. This can happen due to a congenital malformation, but the most common cause is pressure on the groin forcing the testicles into an unnatural position. Basically, it's every male cyclist's nightmare. One wrong move and your boys are twisted up like a bad bike chain. And when it happens, you'll know it. The first sign of a testicular torsion is, you guessed it, a searing pain in the balls, intense enough that it makes it impossible to focus on anything else. And that's actually a good thing because this is an emergency. The blood flow to the affected testicle is being cut off, and if it's not restored quickly, the testicle may have to be removed as it'll die. So pain is actually the body's warning system, and in this case, it may save your manhood. The first resort is to try to manually untwist the testicle, but if that doesn't work, emergency surgery usually will. Most of these pains subside quickly if treated, but this one can leave much worse scars. Number 2. Third-degree burns. We've all probably burned ourselves at some point, be it from touching a hot stove as a kid or rushing to get those cookies out of the oven. Likely these were second or first-degree burns, which are largely surface level and will heal on their own with little scarring, but can be extremely painful in the moment. Third-degree burns go deeper into the skin and actually aren't as initially painful because the nerve endings have been destroyed, sometimes rendering the affected area incapable of feeling pain except with deep pressure. But unfortunately, that will not last. The treatment of third-degree burns has been described as some of the most painful experiences of people's lives, as the dead skin usually has to be removed and treated to prevent potentially fatal infections. Once the initial shock wears off and the nerve endings begin to repair themselves, burn survivors often find themselves in agonizing long-term pain that leaves extensive scarring, which can sometimes be repaired with skin grafts, a surgical procedure that often leads to more serious pain during the healing process. But there is one pain that might be even worse, and it's exactly how the culprit likes it. Number 1. Murder hornet stings. The media hypes up a lot of things, so when they started buzzing about murder hornets in 2020, many people wondered if this might be a false alarm. Nope, these massive 2-inch monsters from Japan, actually known as the Asian giant hornet, are not only the largest hornet, but have one of the most painful stings of any animal in the world. These social, highly aggressive insects have a sting that isn't just designed to hurt, like most stinging insects that want to keep you away from their hive. It is designed to damage and possibly kill. This extremely potent venom contains a neurotoxin that causes significant tissue damage almost like acid. Those who have been stung describe it as having a hot nail driven into the leg. They can reportedly even spray the venom separately in the eyes, damaging the victim's vision. And as if the immediate pain isn't enough, the hornet's venom is potent enough that it can be dangerous even if the person isn't allergic. As these social hornets often attack simultaneously, a swarm can be deadly. Of course, even one is enough to bring a grown man to his knees, which probably explains why when they showed up in the US, it was all hands on deck to wipe them out. Want to know about a plant that could kill you? Check out death apple, the most dangerous tree in the world, or watch this video instead.